Southern Fried True Crime covers cases that are not suitable for young listeners, and there may also be some explicit language used. Today's episode will have upsetting homophobic language used only in quotes. I apologize, but words matter, especially when discussing a hate crime. Listener discretion is advised. On this day, June 26th, in 2003, the Supreme Court announced their opinion in Lawrence v. Texas. In 1998, Houston police entered John Lawrence's apartment. They were responding to a reported weapons disturbance. When the police went inside, they saw Lawrence and Tyron Garner, an adult male, engaging in a private consensual sexual act. The two men were arrested and convicted of deviant sexual intercourse, a violation of a Texas statute, the homosexual conduct law, forbidding two persons of the same sex to engage in certain intimate sexual conduct. Lawrence appealed to the U.S. Supreme Court, saying that the police violated his liberty and privacy protected by the Due Process Clause of the 14th Amendment. The Supreme Court agreed. In the decision, Justice Kennedy wrote, "Their right to liberty under the Due Process Clause gives them the right to engage in their conduct without intervention of the government. The Texas statute furthers no legitimate state interest which can justify its intrusion into the personal and private life of the individual." In layman's terms, the decision ruled that it was unconstitutional to criminally punish someone who engages in same-sex sexual activity. The decision struck down sodomy laws in 13 other states, decriminalizing same-sex intimacy. John Lawrence's arrest was 2 years after a man named Fred Mangione was viciously murdered in a hate crime in a small Texas town about a half hour from Houston. Abolishing sodomy laws did not stop hate crimes, but it did lead to more tolerance and, over time, more acceptance and civil rights for the LGBTQ community. When Roe v. Wade was reversed, after almost 50 years of precedent, this past Friday, Justice Clarence Thomas wrote a concurring opinion arguing that the court should reconsider similar due process cases, specifically Griswold, Obergefell, and Lawrence v. Texas. Welcome to episode 156, The Murder of Fred Mangione. Today's episode is about the murder of a gay man, and as I said in the beginning, unfortunately, a few direct quotes I use will have a homophobic slur, the F word. I would obviously rather just say the F word than the slur, but in doing so, I would be diluting the ugly power in that word, softening the ugly things said to and about the victim. So I will remind you to listen carefully. It's astonishing to me that someone would think I would want to say those words or that I used them directly myself, but that's where we are lately with critical thinking. I think we also forget that in decades past, gay men used that word themselves in order to take control of that power. Direct quotes from Fred's partner will reflect this. Located 30 miles directly west of Houston, Texas, sits Katie, whose motto is, "Small town charm with big city convenience." If the town sounds familiar, it's because I have covered a case in Katy before. The murder of Belinda Temple was a two-part case in episodes 127 and 128 last August. For more detailed Katy history, check out those episodes. Today, there are more than 20,000 residents in Katy, Texas. But back in the 1990s, when this case took place, there were only half as many. Nestled in a Katy strip mall was Dolly's Place, a neighborhood bar. On the night of January 4th, 1996, two regulars were having drinks there, 46-year-old Fred Mangione and his partner of 16 years, Ken Stern. According to the Washington Post, the couple had always felt comfortable and welcome at Dolly's. The patrons were almost all straight, but that didn't seem to matter to anyone. They loved Fred and Ken and welcomed them with open arms. On that January night, the couple had a few drinks while enjoying the company of the other regulars. After a few drinks, Fred started to try to sell his Avon products, which aggravated a customer who wasn't a regular. He yelled out, "Someone ought to whip those fags." Two young men, Daniel Bean and Ronald Godier, walked over to the disgruntled man and calmed him down by promising to mess with the fags. Everyone else, including Ken and Fred, seemed unfazed by the whole situation. They didn't take the man seriously, figuring he had had a little too much to drink and was spewing nonsense. Ken went to the jukebox to pick out a new song. That's when Bean and Godier walked up to him, acting friendly as could be. Ken had no reason to be scared of the two men, and he invited them to join him and Fred. Before closing time, Fred would die in Ken's arms. On October 21st, 1949, Frederick Joseph Mangione was born in Paterson, New Jersey. Sadly, we don't know much about Fred's childhood, just that his mother's name was Angelina and he had one sister and two brothers. During the 1960s, Fred married a woman and they welcomed two sons within their 10-year marriage. In or around the year 1977, Fred met Ken Stern at a party. Fred was still married, and Ken had just gotten out of a relationship with a woman. The two men became friends, and later, their relationship turned romantic. Ken described Fred to the Houston Chronicle as being extremely gregarious. He just never shut up. He loved to talk, and he loved people. He trusted everyone, and he would tell you his whole life if you would stay there and listen. Freddie was everybody's best friend, and that's what got him killed. Eventually, Fred got divorced and he and Ken relocated to San Francisco for a short time. They later moved to Texas, hopping between numerous cities including Lubbock and Alvin. Then in 1992, Fred, Ken, and their miniature poodle named Nibbles settled into a quiet middle-class neighborhood located in Katy. Ken and Fred were openly gay in Katy, and they felt safe doing so. While same-sex marriage was illegal in Texas at the time, they lived like a married couple. Ken later told the Houston Chronicle that in Katy, quote, "We were Fred and Kenny. We weren't the faggots or the queers up the street. We helped everybody." They truly felt like members of the community. Susie, a friend and office manager who had known the men for years, told the Post, quote, "People come into your life and they touch you. They showed us a great deal. We weren't even aware at the time of how much they were showing us, the longevity of their relationship, how much love and togetherness they shared. They were like an old married couple." After Fred's mom, Angelina, broke her hip, the couple moved her into their 4-bedroom home. Then Ken and Fred started working as waiters at a 24-hour restaurant so they could take turns caring for Angelina. They also sold Avon on the side. And later, Ken's mother also moved in. According to the Washington Post, after Ken's mother moved in with them, a running joke with the two men became the joys and difficulties of dealing with the moms, or the kids as they often referred to the two elderly women. On December 24th, 1995, Ken and Fred celebrated their 16th anniversary together. Ken later told the Associated Press that if it had not been for Fred's murder, "We would have gone on forever," he said. "We'd be old and gray and laughing in front of the TV set." By the time the holidays were over, the couple was ready for a break from their moms. They wanted to just get away for a bit to get some peace and quiet. So almost 2 weeks later, on January 4th, Fred and Ken went to a local mall and just walked around, discussing their plans to spend Valentine's Day at Disney World, just the two of them, no kids. Later that evening, they went to Dolly's place. When Fred and Ken walked into the bar, they noticed two men they had never seen before. Ken didn't feel any danger or threatening vibes from the unknown men. Neither did Fred, who was laughing and talking to all the patrons in typical Fred fashion. The two men were 19-year-old Daniel Christopher Bean and 21-year-old Ronald Henry Godier, half-brothers from Montana who were in town to visit their shared mother. We really don't know much about either man. Their mom later testified that Godier was well-liked, calm, and quiet. He was the complete opposite of Bean, who was none of those things. The other thing we know about Bean and Gautier is that they were both part of a neo-Nazi group called the German Peace Corps, or GPC. Bean even had the group's initials tattooed on his arm. According to Klan Watch, a project of the civil rights group Southern Poverty Law Center, the GPC is a white supremacist group with philosophical ties to the KKK. Captain Don McWilliams of the Harris County Sheriff's Department told the Washington Post that the group was based in California, and they, quote, target blacks and homosexuals for victimization. Because the group was not well organized, that's about all authorities knew about them. According to the Post, Ben and Gautier did not fit the stereotype of skinheads in jackboots. By most accounts, they looked like many young men in their late teens or early 20s, with longish hair and a studdedly shabby appearance. On January 4th, 1996, Ben and Gautier were visiting their mother in Katy, Texas. While there, they decided to get a drink a few blocks away at Dolly's place. They took notice of Ken and Fred. The brothers watched as a male patron got angry and started cursing at Fred, yelling out that someone should whip those fags. Ben and Gautier spoke with the man. They calmed him down by promising to mess with the fags, as they put it. The man should not worry about a thing, they said. They would take care of it. The brothers walked up to Ken, who was standing at a jukebox. They were super friendly, so Ken had no worries about their intentions. He invited them to come talk with him and Fred. According to testimony at Bean's trial, Fred had some cocaine with him and shared it with the brothers. They were seen walking in and out of the bar's restroom together. After midnight, Fred and Ken announced that they were going to drive to a nearby convenience store to buy cigarettes. The brothers asked if they could tag along. Fred and Ken were having a good time with the nice out-of-towners, so they said sure. Around 30 minutes later, the four men returned to Dolly's and parked in front of the bar. Ken told the group he was going inside, and Fred replied, "Okay, we'll be in a minute." Ken later said Fred was planning to try to talk to the brothers about Avon. Ken went inside and sat down on a bar stool. He told the bartender, Shannon, that he was tired and wanted to go home. Ken knew that Fred always did what Shannon asked him to, so he begged Shannon to tell Fred it was time to go. As Shannon went around the bar to go get Fred, Gautier ran inside and charged Ken, knocking him off the bar stool. Ken struggled with his attacker until bar patrons realized what was going on and pulled him off. As Ken got up, Daniel Bean ran in and put his bloody 6-inch deer gutting knife on the bar countertop. That's when Ken realized Fred was nowhere to be seen. He later told the Advocate, "I think, oh my God, Freddie, he's still out there." Ken ran outside and found his partner of 16 years inside the van, lying in a pool of blood. He told the Advocate, "I said, babe, please don't leave me now." His breathing was real labored. I knew he was leaving me, but I thought maybe he could hold on. But Fred couldn't hold on. He had been stabbed 35 times in the legs, side, and back. Ken told the Houston Chronicle, "He bled to death in my arms. I had never seen his eyes so crystal clear. They were like pools, like blue diamonds. I said, babe, hold on. And then he took 4 breaths. I said, breathe with me, but he was gone." Meanwhile, inside the bar, patrons called 911 while Bean and Gautier fled. As they were running across the street, parole officer Tim Navarre caught sight of them. Thinking the 2 young men were out past curfew, Navarre stopped them. When he got a good look at the brothers, Navarre realized Bean was covered in blood. Gautier's shirt and jacket were clean, but there was a smear of blood across the lower part of his jeans. Navarre asked what they were doing, and Bean responded nonchalantly with, "We just cut up this fag real bad." When asked why, the brothers informed the officer that Fred had made an unwanted sexual advance on them inside the van. One of them added, "Where we come from, men don't do that." The brothers were placed under arrest after Ken and other patrons identified them as the last people seen with Fred prior to the stabbing. According to the Associated Press, witness testimony suggested that the two men seemed to think people would approve of what they did or would not care because the victim was gay. When Ken heard about Fred supposedly touching one of the brothers, he couldn't believe it. He told the Houston Chronicle that if the allegation were true, wouldn't the stab wounds have been, quote, all in the face, not in the opposite direction? There was no reason for these people to do what they did, he added. Many newspaper articles focused on this allegation, subtly questioning if 46-year-old Fred had truly come on to the brothers. This really seemed to upset Ken, who told the Associated Press on January 19th that he didn't want to talk about if Fred had made any advances toward the men. He said, "When they met me at the jukebox, they were very, very friendly and open. Please leave it like that." It seems to me like Ken was getting tired of journalists asking him if Fred really did come on to the men. And he had every right to be upset about that, because even if Fred had made an advance, was that a justifiable reason to stab him 35 times? In February, Ken did soften a bit, telling the advocate the only thing he would have put on them was cosmetics. During the investigation, it became obvious very quickly that Bean and Gautier had planned the attack on Fred and Ken. 3 patrons at the bar told the police that they overheard the brothers calming the angry patron down by saying they'd mess with the fags. But they didn't take it seriously. Almost immediately, which was rare in 1996, Captain Don McWilliams of the Harris County Sheriff's Department told the media, quote, "It's very clear it was a hate crime. They've shown no remorse over the act. It appears very clear they did precisely what they intended to do." Sheriff Tommy Thomas concurred, saying, "This has to be a hate crime. This is not just, stab a person and kill them. There's a lot of hate involved in this." And he was right. 35 stab wounds is a lot. It's vicious. It's frenzied. Just a day after the brutal murder on January 5th, the FBI joined the investigation after hearing that Bean and Gautier were members of the German Peace Corps. The FBI was looking into the possibility that the GPC was a domestic terrorist group. In the end, they could find no evidence of the existence of the group. If it ever did exist, it must have been a loose-knit group. However, like I said earlier, ClanWatch was able to determine that the GPC was a white supremacist group with philosophical ties to the KKK. Jim Conway, a spokesperson with the FBI's Houston office, told the Houston Voice, quote, "It seems like the Mangione killing, although tragic, appears to have been a random act of violence, unrelated to a domestic terrorist group." Fred's murder was also not a capital offense, as it did not occur during the commission of a felony such as robbery, so the prosecution did not seek the death penalty. The brothers pleaded not guilty, and their trials were later separated. At first, bond was set at $50,000 for Bean and Gautier. It was then increased to $200,000, but Ken refused to accept such a low amount. He told the Washington Post that he had recently read that the bond had been set at $1 million in a case involving the illegal slaughter of a buffalo in Texas. He said, quote, "I don't want Texas to be known as a place where livestock is worth more than a citizen. I know a buffalo is endangered, but I only had one Fred." Ken and his supporters showed up at the courthouse to protest the $200,000 bond. The pressure they put on the judge worked, and he ordered both defendants to be held without bond. Fred's murder made the national news, and understandably, people were outraged. In the 2 years prior, there had been a lot of attention placed on Texas for the amount of attacks they had on gay people. Obviously, these attacks were not just happening in Texas. They were happening all over the country. Matt Foreman, executive director of the New York City Gay and Lesbian Anti-Violence Project, told the Washington Post, quote, All across the country, gay men and some lesbians are being found, sometimes on a weekly basis, hideously murdered. One of the reasons Texas has gotten this attention is that, gratefully, in Texas, the perpetrators are usually apprehended. By and large, they are never caught elsewhere. But in Texas, you have perps whose motives are known. Experts told the Washington Post in 1998 that the victims of gay bashing were usually men. They were picked up for assault or murder by people they did not know because they were often perceived as weak and unwilling to fight back. The perpetrators were usually white men in their late teens or early 20s, and few had criminal records prior to the attacks. They often committed these attacks in groups, typically traveling to gay neighborhoods looking for victims. It became known as gay bashing in the media, with the Post even calling it a male bonding ritual, like how gang initiates need to demonstrate their manliness. Except, like I said, these young men typically had no prior record or affiliation with gangs. We would prefer to think of this as only happening with gangs, something Middle America had little experience with. And perpetrators usually believe their acts will be approved or at least condoned by the larger society. Statistics on violence against gay people were not the most accurate in the 1990s, and that's because many victims were scared to come forward, not wanting to be outed. It has been estimated that 75% of victims never came forward. According to the National Gay and Lesbian Task Force, there were 30 confirmed anti-gay murders in 1992. Then in 1994, there were 59, which is nearly a 100% increase. 10 of those attacks were in Texas, while 28 were in New York City alone. The reason for the uptick was most likely because gay people were more visible in the 1990s than they had been in the past. Dr. C. Welton Gaddy, a Baptist preacher who was head of the Gay-Friendly Interfaith Alliance in Washington, D.C., told the Dallas Morning News in 1996, quote, "Even 10 years ago, and certainly 20 years ago, talking about homosexuals was in many instances a theoretical discussion. Now when we talk about gays and lesbians, we're talking about individuals with whom we work and with whom we worship. Even people who have moral questions about homosexuality have friends who are gay." Diane Hardy Garcia, executive director of the Lesbian Gay Rights Lobby of Texas, told the Washington Post that people who committed these crimes were, quote, taught to hate somewhere. Advocates and academic researchers believe the hatred comes from the media and a lack of education, but it also comes from religion and politics. According to that same Dallas Morning News article in '96, the Human Rights Campaign, a gay advocacy group, quote, accused conservatives of fomenting hatred of gays in recent months, citing everything from conversion ads to top congressional Republicans' denunciations of homosexuality as sin and addiction. Aaron Masterson, president of the Gay, Lesbian, and Bisexual Alliance at the University of Houston, told the Texas Triangle that Fred's murder was another example of the link between hate speech, political rhetoric, and violence. He said, "Certain religious people say it's okay to hate the sin, but to love the sinner. Some get this message, but many don't. They are taught that homosexuality is wrong, and they use it to justify killing in the name of God." Daniel Bean's trial began in August 1996. The prosecution told the jury that the brothers set Fred up by being kind to him, pretending to be his friend. All the while, they were plotting to kill him. The prosecution's theory of the murder was that Ronald Gautier held Fred down in the van while Bean stabbed him 35 times. To really hit home at the motive for Fred's murder, the prosecution held up a picture from his autopsy and told the jury, quote, "This is what you get for being gay." Because Bean admitted to the murder, the defense was trying for a lesser conviction. They told the jury that when Fred gave Bean cocaine, he was pouring gasoline on a smoldering fire. Quote, it enhanced the risk of a bad thing happening. Even if the part about cocaine was true, it's not an excuse, and the defense was victim blaming. On August 29th, after deliberating for around 3 hours, the jury found Bean guilty of murder. Next, they had to decide his fate. The prosecution was aiming for life in prison, while the defense wanted leniency because Bean was, quote, mistreated as a youth. A police officer in Washington, where Bean once lived, testified that he told her he suffered from a chemical imbalance that caused him to feel homicidal. He also said he used to electrocute pet rats for fun. On August 30th, Bean was sentenced to life in prison, which was the maximum penalty. He will have to serve a minimum of 30 years before he is eligible for parole. In June 1997, Ronald Gaudier's trial began. The prosecution's case was very similar to Bean's. They told the jury that the brothers were like wolves in the bar, stalking Fred and Ken because they were gay. After describing how Fred was murdered, the prosecution added, a little gay bashing. That's what they were doing. Gaudier's defense was that he wasn't directly involved in Fred's murder. He wasn't in the van when Bean stabbed Fred. The defense had a former Houston Police Crime Lab director testify that Gaudier couldn't have been in the van during the attack on Fred because there was no blood on his shirt or jacket. But we didn't find an explanation for the smear on his jeans. On the other hand, Daniel Bean, the killer, was covered in blood, as was the van. Gaudier took the stand in his own defense, reiterating that he was not in the van when Fred was killed. He told the jury, I had no idea what Dan had done. Gaudier said he left the van frightened after Fred offered Bean cocaine if he would expose himself. Gaudier said he ran to the bar for help, but Ken refused to do anything, so Gaudier hit him. That's a convenient story and not what witnesses in the bar said happened that night. They and Ken said that Gaudier ran in and knocked him off the stool without warning. On June 27th, after deliberating for 10 hours, the jury found Gaudier guilty of murder. But then they had to determine Gaudier's sentence, which could be anywhere from probation to life in prison. The prosecution argued that Gaudier should be sentenced to prison time, while the defense said he should receive probation because there was no proof he was in the van. After deliberating for about another hour, the jury decided Gaudier should receive probation for his role in the murder. An unnamed juror later explained their decision to the Houston Chronicle. They agreed with the defense that there was no proof that Gaudier was in the van when Fred was killed. Under Texas law, the jury had been required to convict him of murder because he was a party to the crime, but they didn't have to send him to prison for life. Ken was understandably devastated by the jury's decision. He told the Houston Chronicle, if they find him guilty of at least being there, how do they let him walk the streets? He said he was scared because Gaudier would be living with his mother in the subdivision next to his. He added, for the rest of my life, I have to watch what he does. On June 30th, Judge Werner Voigt sentenced Gaudier to 10 years of probation with some strict conditions. He had to complete 1,000 hours of community service, write a letter of apology to Ken and the citizens of Harris County, pass a high school equivalency test, attend community college, get a job, stay more than 150 feet from Ken, stay away from hate groups, stay away from guns and knives, attend boot camp, and have no contact with Bean. Gaudier's defense attorney told the Houston Chronicle that the no contact rule would be the toughest condition for Gaudier because he wanted to visit his brother. The prosecution said they asked for this specific condition because they had heard Bean was already involved in a white supremacist group in prison. The judge also made it clear to 23-year-old Gaudier that if he messed up at any point during his probation, he would be sent to prison. It's unclear what Ronald Gaudier did after he was off probation. Today, he is not listed as an inmate on the Texas Department of Criminal Justice's website, nor Montana's. Daniel Bean is currently imprisoned at the Robertson Unit in Abilene, Texas. He is eligible for parole in January 2026. According to the Department of Criminal Justice, Bean murdered someone on June 6, 1997, and in March 2001, he was sentenced to 20 years. We couldn't find any details at all about this murder, but we assume it took place inside prison walls, and that he must have gotten a sentence to be served concurrently with his other conviction, or he wouldn't be eligible in 4 years. According to the Advocate, within days of Fred's murder, politicians weighed in with demands for stronger measures against hate crimes. It wasn't the first time they had done that. In May 1995, less than a year before Fred's murder, a bill to add sexual orientation to the state's hate crimes law lost by 2 votes in the House. Texas did eventually add it to their statute in 2001. U.S. Representative Sheila Jackson Lee from Houston announced that she was going to ask the House Judiciary Committee to hold hearings on hate crimes. Nothing was done until November 1997, when the Hate Crimes Prevention Act of 1997 was introduced to the House and Senate. The act was not signed into law until almost 12 years later in October 2009, when President Obama was in office. In that time, attacks against people because of their sexual orientation continued to skyrocket. In October 2021, the FBI released its 2020 Hate Crimes Statistics Report. Of the 7,554 hate crime incidents, 20.5% of victims were victimized because of their sexual orientation. For comparison, in 1996, when Fred was murdered, it was 11.6%. I would love to end this episode on a happy note, but it's just not possible. The LGBTQ community continues to be targeted today, and that's why it's important to tell these stories. In June 2021, 3 men in their 20s were convicted of violent crimes against gay men. In December 2017, they had used the Grindr app to lure men to an apartment complex. When the victims arrived, the men held them at gunpoint and forced them to drive to ATMs to withdraw cash from their accounts. Some of the men were physically assaulted and one was sexually assaulted. All were taunted with gay slurs. The U.S. Attorney for the Northern District of Texas said in a statement, quote, "These defendants brutalized multiple victims, singling them out due to their sexual orientation. We cannot allow this sort of violence to fester unchecked. In the meantime, we urge dating app users to remain vigilant. Unfortunately, predators often lurk online." And then there is the damage religious figures are still causing to this day. In 2022, preacher Dylan Oz of Steadfast Baptist Church in Texas came under fire for his bigoted and dangerous sermons. In one, he told his followers, quote, "What does God say is the answer, is the solution for the homosexual in 2022? Here in the New Testament, here in the book of Romans, that they are worthy of death." It's incredible to me that there are people who still think this way. It is so contrary to my own belief system. I was not brought up to hate. I was brought up to love. And to also think critically. I unfortunately need to mention reviews and trolls again. I am often accused of being political in my storytelling, and my answer to that is, I rarely ever actually discuss politics. But I've had countless people yell at me in reviews and on social media to leave politics out of their true crime. That politics have nothing to do with true crime. First of all, y'all are dead wrong. From your hometown sheriff to district attorneys, judges, legislators, and all the way to the Supreme Court, these are elected positions. I know that we don't literally elect the Supreme Court justices, but we do elect the men who appoint them. And then we are stuck with them until they choose to retire or die. My point is, as you consume true crime, it is important to remember that the people who prosecute and adjudicate crime are in elected or appointed positions. They enforce the laws of their state. I think people sometimes just forget that politicians wrote those laws. That's what the legislature is for. But then again, if you're only here for the gory details, you might not even think about politics and crime. And I truly only ever actually say a politician's name when it is related to legislation. If you read politics into my storytelling, then it is a natural part of the case, like when I am explaining the power of some district attorneys. Remember, we have visited Katy, Texas before on this show, and specifically the ethical problems with a Harris County prosecutor. That is politics. I'm sorry if you don't like it, but it is. And if anything, the murder of Fred Mangione is the perfect example of how politics and true crime are inherently related. It's not only the outcry from politicians after Fred's murder. Remember, the Harris County Sheriff's Department was actually very quick to label Fred's murder as a hate crime, and this was before sexual orientation was even on Texas's hate crime statute. But then when it got to court, Ken had to fight bond for these men. It was the kind of brutal murder where the accused rarely get bond. But a judge originally gave Bean and Gautier a $50,000 bond each. And then Ronald Gautier gets off with just 10 years of probation. The system worked, and then it didn't. All in the same case. Ironically, one of the few times that I have mentioned a politician's name was in my 100th episode about the hate crime murder of Billy Jack Gaither in Alabama. Billy Jack was murdered just 3 years after Fred Mangione, and I had to discuss hate crime legislation in Alabama in that episode. Billy and Fred's cases are painfully similar. Both were targeted by straight men. And in both cases, gay panic was used as a defense. The gay panic defense, or homosexual advance defense as it's sometimes known, is a legal strategy where the defendant claims to have reacted violently due to unwanted same-sex sexual advances, typically from men. Fred Mangione was in a committed, long-term relationship, and his partner was there that night. Ken said the most he would have wanted to do to these men is sell them Avon. But even if he had hit on the brothers, all they had to do was say no. But we know that's a lie. Witnesses say that Bean and Gautier were looking for a fight. Well, not a fight. A fight would suggest all parties were mutually involved. They approached Fred at the jukebox, acting friendly, after promising to, quote, mess with the fags. They again asked to join Ken and Fred when they went to get cigarettes. No one made Bean or Gautier get into that van. They saw an opportunity. Ken luckily got out before the attack started, and it's debatable whether or not Robert Gautier got out of the van before. But we do know that Daniel Bean viciously stabbed Fred Mangione 35 times in the back, side, and legs. Not face to face. He jumped him. And since Ken had escaped to the safety of the bar, Robert Gautier had to physically jump him at the bar, knocking him off the stool before other patrons pulled him off. There's no doubt in my mind that these brothers meant to kill Fred and Ken. Remember, when stopped by a cop who noticed blood on his clothes, Bean had no trouble confessing, quote, we just cut up this fag real bad. Did he think that excuse would work? Who knows? What we do know is that sexual relations between consenting same-sex adults was against Texas law at that time. Texas did eventually add sexual orientation to their hate crime statute, and not long after that, Lawrence v. Texas federally protected the LGBTQ community. That decision specifically protects same-sex sexual intimacy. It has been precedent for over 2 decades. But as Americans just learned, even 50 years of precedent does not protect our rights. That is why Justice Thomas's words were so chilling. It's why we can't stop fighting. We live in a world with so much political and religious rhetoric on too many issues. I guess I will just never understand this one. Why can't we open our hearts? Love thy neighbor. Isn't that also what the Bible teaches? My heart aches for Ken. He fought so hard for justice for Fred. They would be in their 70s now, and together almost 43 years if Fred hadn't been murdered. Kenny and Freddie with gray hair, laughing and watching TV. That was Ken Stern's dream. But he only had one Fred. Southern Fried True Crime is hosted and produced by me, Erica Kelley. Today's episode was written by Haley Gray and myself and researched by Haley Gray and Anna Luria. Southern Fried's original music is by Rob Harrison of Gamma Radio, and the original graphic art is by Coley Horner. If you have any case suggestions, please visit my website, southernfriedtruecrime.com, and go to the Listener Suggestion tab. If you have submitted a case suggestion in the last few months, please resubmit it on the website. This is the best way for me to get to those little-known cases y'all always send me. Please remember that I do not accept suggestions on social media private messaging. With 3 platforms to manage, that is very overwhelming for me. I hope you understand. And as I have now complained about trolls in 2 episodes in a row, you know why I don't like private messages. But please do come join our Facebook group, Southern Fried True Crime Fans Discussion Group, where we swap recipes, worship Dolly Parton, and share memes. I much prefer spending my social media time in our lovely group. We do, of course, discuss true crime, not just Southern Fried, but all kinds, but it is still very much a Southern lifestyle group. Our group is a safe and fun corner of Facebook, and by God, we mean it when we say no shit asses allowed. It's not just a motto, it's how we run the group. If you enjoyed today's show, don't forget to subscribe and please tell a friend or rate and review on iTunes. I'm also on all large platforms like iHeart, Stitcher, and Spotify. Until next time, thanks so much for listening. Y'all take care.